You are This Way Up, I'm Simon Morton, and between now and 2 we'll be exploring how technology is helping athletes and coaches win. Plus we'll discover how tech is bringing fans closer to the game and how this is changing the spectator experience. This live event was hosted at Eden Park in Auckland by the Institution of Professional Engineers New Zealand in conjunction with the Sports Performance Research Institute and Radio New Zealand National. We've got an all-star team. After a hectic transfer window, we made some marquee signings to the squad. First of all, John Cronin, he is the co-director of the Sports Performance Research Institute New Zealand, as well as being a professor of strength and conditioning at AUT. Hamish Carter is an Olympic gold medal winning triathlete and all-round fit bugger, and these days he's helping the next generation of Kiwi athletes as the performance planning manager at High Performance Sport and through his business Sport Connect. Jamie Tout has worked as a strength and conditioning coach for top athletes around the world. He co-developed VX Sport, which is a wee gadget that players wear to monitor performance when they're training and competing. It's used by the All Blacks as well as rugby league, cricket teams and broadcasters throughout the world. And finally, former international rugby star turned Sky Sports journalist and presenter Melody Robinson. She's won 2 Rugby World Cups playing for the Black Ferns and is a commentator and journalist with Sky Sports. So we kicked off with a question for Hamish Carter. How much technology is there in a top athlete's life today?
For an athlete who's either on a pathway or is trying to be the world's best, they've got at their disposal so much data and so much information like never before. And I guess there's a ton of experts around them as well who are there to try and help them interpret, understand and apply change to what they're doing in the daily training environment. On one hand it's really good, but on the other hand it's incredibly difficult because it can have the effect that it creates clutter. You can get to a point where you're trying to verify a theory through selecting the set of certain data you want to see, which may hide the real issue. So I think in that sense, it's everywhere, and it's accelerating, I think.
Jamie, you co-developed VX Sport, and we have some VX Sport monitors here with us. They're incredibly small, about the size of a matchbox. Just take us through how a sports person would use this technology.
Yeah, so like you say, it's about the size of a matchbox. It weighs a little bit less than a tennis ball. And the players will wear those during games and training. And I guess predominantly what we use them for is monitoring load. So whether the athlete's overtraining and undertraining, and both those two things are as dangerous as each other. And just trying to find, I guess, more about the game itself and just trying to work out what are the actual game demands. So are we training actually like we're playing? And how do we actually measure position by position what the demands are?
Do you think that's making better sports people? Is this technology assisting people perform better?
Yeah, look, I think a good example would probably be we saw professionalism of rugby about 25 years ago. And whilst the general population in that time was increasing their body weight by about 4.5 kilos, the rugby player was closer to 12, so about 3 times as much. So part of that comes down to technology and learning around what mechanisms do we have to make that rugby player bigger, faster, stronger. And I think technology does play a role in that regard. So it is for the athlete, I guess, a conditioning tool, and it's a way of giving them accountability around their trainings and making sure that everyone's doing what they should be doing.
And I'm keen to explore how coaches are using this technology, because we have essentially this data wave now that is coming in, and I guess how do you interpret that, and how do you decide whether you listen to the data or do you actually watch a player on the pitch? And that surely is a huge challenge, I guess, for anyone in this space. But before we do, what about the average athlete? Have they got loads of smart devices now? Do they travel with sort of laptops and iPads, and are they tweeting? And what sort of expectation is there today of a modern professional athlete in terms of the way they engage with tech?
I think performance on cue really requires a huge amount of personal responsibility. And one thing athletes have got to be mindful of is that, or the technology's got to be mindful, is that it doesn't take the decision-making ability away from the athlete or the athlete stops taking responsibility for their performance, or even understanding what their performance needs to look like and the person they need to become. Because in those critical moments of an event or a game or whatever, a tournament, the athlete's preparation will determine if they make the right decision at the right time and they're prepared for the situation they're about to be faced with. If they've had data and information and all their ability to interpret, be instinctive and have the X factor is taken away, I'm not saying that's what technology does, but it can, and I've seen it happen with some athletes, and they stop becoming expert decision makers and thinkers. They become kind of do the performance. Coach tells me what to do next, and I stop actually owning my own performance. So it's a real challenging space to be in, I think, for an athlete in that context.
Can I add to that? A lot of the time we talk to Steve Hansen and some of the coaches with the All Blacks, and Steve Hansen always says that he looks at statistics as a guide from a program called Nelly Rugby, which has been around for a while, and it's basically what all of the rugby teams in New Zealand and the All Blacks use to analyse every aspect of rugby. It could be how many breakdowns you go to, how many tackles you make, but what that doesn't show you is the quality of the work at the breakdown, the quality of the tackle, and your work off the ball. So statistics used in those programs are really useful in a guide, but sometimes instinct and actually watching the play as well combined with that is something that they use too.
Now, recently at the FIFA World Cup, I know there was a report that all of the England team were given iPads and they were loaded up with an app where they could analyse their competitor. So you could basically say, well, I'm going to be marking this guy, and I know he, 60% of the time he'll take it on his right foot and then he'll pass with his left. How much an issue is that for competitive athletes today here in New Zealand? Are we analysing our competition using technology? Is that giving us an edge? Maybe, Jamie, have you got a comment there?
What Kiwis do really well is we deal with chaos well. So generally speaking, we are instinctive in the way we play. And that's, I guess, what Hamish was alluding to before, and I totally agree. Like, those little boxes will capture 1 million data points, 1 million data points every 2 hours. That's how quickly they sample. So we can quickly get ourselves into a sense of paralysis analysis. It's actually paralysing looking at so many different numbers. So when we start looking at how our competitors are playing, it's really trying to get in place your big rocks. What are the things that are most important to us for our performance? Not detraining our strengths, not trying to play like the next person, but just trying to analyse it in a way that we are going to play to our strengths, not trying to look at your competition too closely, but understanding them. So it's all important to say, yeah, that person moves to their left more than their right, or if we put them under pressure, they're going to go back to doing this. But it's just as important to focus on what our strengths are and understanding the game demands as much as anything.
Can I bounce in there too?
Bounce away.
Thanks. The other thing is that because we've got so much information on opposition, it's getting to a stage most probably where it's off-field where we can make the great gains in the use of the technology in terms of what we do during the week, in terms of training load, recovery. I think that's going to be one of the areas that most probably we start seeing the use of the technology. It's been used in that capacity there, but the on-field data that we're seeing is quite extensive of opposition. So what we do off-field is most probably an area we could actually delve into a lot.
Yeah, the All Blacks travel with their stats guy who uses the analysis program the whole time, so it's been something they've used for quite some time.
Yeah, and you can imagine if you're sitting in a coaching box with Steve Hansen trying to make decisions about someone's physical prowess out in the field, and Richie McCaw's heart rate's at 190 and it's been there for 15 minutes, and you say to Steve Hansen, like, you need to drag Richie, what's the answer going to be? So in isolation, these things are quite dangerous.
Yeah.
Like it's the technical, tactical, physical, mental. When we start dragging those things together and understanding how they influence each other, that's where the power is. At the moment, we're still learning. We're still learning how to actually put these things on a single page. And like any metric by itself actually doesn't tell you a hell of a lot. Like I said to Melody, like if I was comparing a T20 cricket game, a netball game, and say a rugby game, which athlete travels the furthest in a game?
Don't know, you tell me.
So the answer is they're all about the same.
Huh.
So in a high end of a netball game, they're travelling about 7 Ks. In a rugby game, they're travelling about 7 Ks. In a game of T20 cricket, they're travelling about 7 Ks. Now, the problem with that is, are they all doing the same thing? Well, not even close. It's then understanding how did they accumulate that distance? Is it made up of jumping, collisions, contact, sprints? How's it made up? And that's where the power is going to come eventually for our training purposes particularly.
What about the business side and connecting athletes with the commercial sector? Because that, for a lot of athletes, is how they pay the rent, and they have to get a sponsor, or they have to join a franchise, and they have to get a professional contract. Is technology enabling athletes to market themselves, but also create data that acts as equity for them, so they could take that to a franchise and say, well, look at the assists. 60% of the time I touch the ball, I score a goal.
I think definitely in the sponsorship side of things, typically a sponsor these days, if they're going to sponsor an individual athlete, would definitely look at their social profile and go, how many people do you reach? And
not how many Twitter followers you've got.
All the rest, yeah.
Oh, no. Oh, no. Maybe I shouldn't be here.
Yeah.
I broke through 10.
Yeah. And so, that's a pretty easy way to, show reach and impact, and that's obviously getting more sophisticated. But that's where it's quite interesting, because I think your performance is on the stage for everyone to see. Now, obviously, your whole life is, and obviously those two things become more and more linked, and that's only going to become more. So even if you have a breakthrough performance and suddenly people you're on TV and people start following you, ultimately, you're out at night, everyone's got a smartphone that can go anywhere quickly. So it's a challenging space. So when you go, sports star becomes default role model, there's no guidebook to being a role model, or there are no rules that are sort of spelled out. So it's quite challenging. I guess I keep coming back to personal responsibility. Bottom line is, I'm not against technology, I'm actually for it, but that's where, for me, performance at the highest level, that's sort of the starting point. It's just one more dynamic that a professional athlete's got to deal with.
Using Corey Jane or Piri Wepu as a bit of an example or case study of how they use Twitter or Instagram, is that neither of them wanted to, get their brand to a certain level because they're already famous. It was more about the decision for them to engaging with the fan at their own level, at their own pace, at their own time, with their own language, and also controlling their own media releases as well. So no longer, you have a media officer with rugby teams that will let you talk to a player or not, or you can try and stalk them, the rest of it. But what they'd do is be proactive and announce something on Twitter or Instagram, which was a really smart way to do it. And Corey Jane's profile is bigger from that than it probably has been from his on-field, I guess, prowess. And he's got work through Sky Sport because he's got such a great reach with people on social media.
You're listening to iPen's Technology Challenging Society series. Today, Better, Stronger, Faster, Engineering the Perfect Athlete. I'm Simon Morton. It was recorded in front of a live audience at Eden Park last week. The team includes Olympic champ Hamish Carter, Sky Sports presenter and journalist Melody Robinson, top strength and conditioning coach Jamie Tout, and John Cronin. He's the co-director of the Sports Performance Research Institute of New Zealand. So, will technology ever replace the role of the coach? Here's John.
In terms of better, stronger, faster, and engineering the perfect athlete, I think technology has a small part. The athlete still has to do the work. They still got to go out there and lift, run, swim. What the technology has enabled us to do is to be more effective and be more efficient in what we've always done. We've always gone out there and taught them how to throw a ball, or to lift or run faster. So take coaching, for example, going out and passing a ball. What the technology, they still have to go out there and pass the ball, but what the technology has enabled us now is to actually grab an iPad, with an app, Canavea or, My Coach or anything like that, grab that, and then we can give them instant feedback. So a lot of the technology is enabling us to give feedback straight away to make the coaching much better. It's the same with strength and conditioning. We've got linear position transducers that can tell us the velocity of a bar. That again just adds a little bit of better information, but we still get them to lift. To get strong, they must lift. So, but it's fine-tuning what we're doing in that regard, and plus putting numbers in front of athletes actually motivates them. So it's never going to replace it. In fact, a lot of what it's just fine-tuning and giving us feedback on what we already have done. It's just making us better in that regards, I think.
Is there a danger here that coaches rely too much on the tech and they stop watching what's actually happening on the field, Jamie?
You invest in people first, 100%. People are the best resource we've got. Technology, when used correctly, is gold, but the first 80-90% is the people. And I think we could easily fall into a trap of like a PlayStation culture, which is, I guess, best explained by playing Tiger Woods golf on a PlayStation, and you hit the first one down the fairway, everyone's happy. You go out and you play 9 holes at a nice golf course. The first one you put down the fairway, everyone's happy. But then you're back on the PlayStation, you hook your next one into the water, plop it goes in. The first thing you do is press the reset button and and there's no consequence. Whereas out in the golf course, you've got to get wet or you have to go and take the penalty stroke, whatever. And technology can be a bit like that. If there's no consequence to what we're sort of telling people, the feedback's not there immediately, it becomes a little bit redundant. And that's probably the best example I can give, is that with these numbers, how we can simplify it in a way that the coach understands, the physio gets it, the athlete's getting some value, and so they're more motivated to understand their results. If we just chuck a whole bunch of numbers in front of them, it just becomes quite paralysing. You know, I think with the Blackfern girls recently in the World Cup, that's what we put a bit of focus on doing. Give them a simple summary, show them what they're doing well. When they walk into their review with the coaches, they've actually got some accountability there. So if they get challenged by the coach saying, look, your work rate was down, there's the numbers, well, yeah, I was right, you're right. Or, hey, hang on, look at what I've done there. And they can go back and forth and it becomes a bit of value add.
So it sounds like, from a policing perspective, technology can be your friend as a coach, but also as an athlete, because it can measure your training regime. It must be incredibly powerful there. I know, just using something like Map My Ride, you can work out, you can go on there and say, well, I was 115th up this climb. Oh, tomorrow I might try and be, getting to the sub 100. That's important data for me. I'm not a pro athlete, but I imagine that type of accountability. We've got GPS, you've got the cloud, the data's being streamed up to the cloud. That's really powerful information, especially when it comes to discipline.
Yeah, it cuts both ways for sure. Like it's another level of accountability for everyone. But again, it's like we're sort of all alluding to, it still comes back on the onus of the athlete. Like, we've got mechanisms now on our smartphones. There's applications like Training Peaks where an athlete can go in, they can log what they've done for their training, they can say, yeah, I've done X, Y, and Z, but it's actually only as good as the information the athlete puts into it. And it all becomes relative. Like, we've gone out for a run and Hamish rates at a 6 and I rated a 9 and Melody rates at an 8. He's finding it easier for different reasons than what we are, and then we go for a different type of sessions and we find it different. So it all becomes relative to the athlete. So again, like I've sort of said, it's very difficult to look at one metric in isolation or one facet of the program in isolation. It has to be looked at very holistically, and the way we can simplify that, that's where we're going to start understanding the data in a more powerful way.
I say times have changed so much over the last 5 years. I've been on the Drug-Free Sport Board for 2 terms, not on it anymore. But, 4 or 5 years ago, we have a program called Whereabouts, and athletes have to put in where they are every day at a certain time, so that if they get drug tested, the tester can turn up without announcing. There's a whole variation of athletes that are on there. Obviously, very high performance triathletes, your Olympic athletes, but a lot of team sport athletes as well. And with a team sport, you've got a whole lot of different people in there, including different socioeconomic groups, even different types of people in the All Blacks. And so there was a real issue that sometimes when a drug tester was trying to get a hold of even an All Black, they'd ring up the home phone because there was no access to the All Black, no cell phone or anything, and the mother would answer and they just couldn't find out where they were. So we had to be aware of all those different kinds of challenges. But now, it doesn't matter who you are, everybody has a smartphone. So there's no excuses not to use the app, put in your whereabouts and get drug tested.
John, you've just recently been overseas, and interested to ask you whether there's an arms race happening in this space at the moment, science, technology, and the way it is interlinking with sport. What did you see around the world, and how are we rating here in New Zealand?
The places I went to were LA, San Fran first, so I went to Stanford there and Cal Berkeley, so they're a couple of big American universities. Very, very impressive institutions, like Stanford had a $10 million TV budget, and Cal Berkeley's got 7 Nobel laureates, a $500 million football stadium, $90 million that they spent on their intercollegiate athletic program. You go and ask them about the technology or the science they're applying. Little to none, because their philosophy was that we've got the money and we've got 330 million people. The cream will rise to the top no matter what. And I go, thank God they're not being too smart, Otherwise it would be very, very terrible for us. It must, at UCal Berkeley, they were this year they were actually adopting GPS for their football team. And I'm going, we're just about moving out of GPS, So they do deliver well. They openly acknowledge that the science that's happening here in New Zealand, in Australia and UK is much better than the science that they're using there. And part of it's just because it's a monster. I think, in New Zealand we've got 12 targeted sports around about, how many athletes, Hamish? About 400?
At the most.
Yeah. They've got something like 58 targeted sports, 16,000 athletes. If you want to have a rowing program, well, it's 5 sites for that rowing program. We've got one site. We can actually just be really smart in what we do because we're so small and nimble. What we do in New Zealand, I think, is pretty stellar, to be quite honest, from what I've seen. I don't know what the rest of the panel reckons.
It's interesting that, because I think we often reflect that our size and our limit to resources is a barrier. But so in my role at High Performance Sport, I met with the guys, Don Tricker who does a lot of work with the All Blacks, and I sort of talked to him about, sports like rowing and bike sort of have a few $1 million to run their whole high performance program, so they have to do the best they can with what they got and try and compete against countries with a lot more money. So you can see that as a barrier or as an opportunity. The way the All Blacks talked about that was that they said, it's funny, we, on the global stage, we actually have got probably a quarter of the funds of other big rugby nations. And so what he said was, so that's an advantage to us because when we go out and tap into or use new technology, we have to do a really robust due diligence and really figure out, is this going to make a difference to our performance? And they really spend the time thinking about it and deciding, is this going to make a difference? And they said, what you see South Africa and some of the other countries doing is they just take everything because they can. And it suddenly becomes not an enabler of performance, but simply can provide clutter. So it's a good example when you think, oh, how can we possibly compete on the world stage? It's almost because of our size, we can. And in a way, I think you're right, the technology and the smarts we've got here with people thinking about what's going to make a difference, before they even get through the door, they have to be so smart and have proven value and a performance outcome well before it even gets to a development phase, because there's just not a lot of money floating around. I think it does put us in a good position.
And Jamie, the economics of this space, sport technology, apps, remote monitoring, it must just be mushrooming. Is it year on year? Is there more and more money being invested and spent in this space?
Certainly is. I think we're at the sort of the bottom side of that curve though at the moment. It's in a sort of steep evolution right now. We're seeing a lot more people enter the personal wearable technologies.
Self-tracking, huge movement, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
For hypochondriacs and sports people.
Yeah. It's becoming more accessible though as well. So that's whereas 5 years ago I think it was just the All Blacks using the technology. Now we're seeing every ITM Cup team is using some form of this technology. We're seeing now club teams, we're seeing secondary school teams start to get it. And I think the challenge now is making that data again really usable in a practical sense. So they're not just doing it because the professional team's doing it, they're actually doing it because we're trying to educate either students or athletes to be better. But commercially, yeah, it is a huge space right now. There's a lot of competition.
It must be hard, though, if you're an up-and-coming coach, because suddenly you have, this is a whole new competency of actually working out what is the noise and what do I listen to and who do I listen to, and then how do I turn that into a conversation I have with a player. That's a new skill, I'm assuming, is it? You have to have scientists or data analysts to give you some sort of graph that you can then say, okay, well, maybe you should think about doing this or that.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is actually knowing what is normal.
What is normal?
Yeah.
Oh, good luck there.
So that's it, because we're looking across different sports. What does it actually mean? Because I've ran 10Ks, is that actually what we'd expect? So an example would be A-League last year. I think they were running 10 or 12 Ks in the game on average. In the EPL, they're running somewhere between 11 and 14 Ks on average. So normal in the EPL is not normal in the A-League, and nor is that normal at a club level. So it's just trying to work out where do I fit in. So if I'm an aspiring all-white and my position's midfield, what do I need to be aiming to do? How many sprints is normal? Like, where do I fit in? And if you can start establishing those norms, and I think for the coach, just trying to keep it simple, and I think those little units there measure 50 different metrics. You just have not got time to look at 50 metrics. You pick 2 or 3, you do it well, understand what your things are that are important to your sport, and just the All Blacks are a great example of that. They do a few things really bloody well.
I think just on top of that, because I think you did right, I think coaches today have to be the masters of exclusion. Yeah. And by that I mean, they've got to know what their priorities are. And they've got to know what evidence sort of proves what their priorities are. And they've got to have, what you call a tight team around them of experts who can sort of help them with that decision-making process. But I think the key is you almost need to make the complex simple. So the athlete has clarity on what the issue is and what they're working on at that moment, but equally how does that connect to their long-term goal and the performance and the person they need to become. So I think technology has a fantastic role to play in that space, and it has to. But it's as you say, it's the interpretation and how does it get applied in the field of play at the critical moment when performance is going to really, really matter.
This is IPEN's Technology Challenging Society series. We're exploring how technology is changing sport. Today's squad includes John Cronin, he's a Professor of Strength and Conditioning at AUT, Jamie Tout, co-creator of athlete monitoring system VX Sport, Olympian Hamish Carter, and Melody Robinson, she's a journalist and presenter for Sky Sports. And working as a presenter and sports journalist, Melody connects audiences with athletes. So how has technology changed the way fans engage with sport?
I still think New Zealand, we're reasonably traditional. You've obviously got more offerings of sport channels with Sky Sport, but it is that traditional sitting down, using your remote control and flicking through My Sky or whatever. So New Zealand is quite traditional, but I think that unlike the examples that you've given just before, I think the States is far ahead of us when it comes to engaging the audience in sports. And one example would be stadia connectivity. So if you sum it up, technology's basically shifted the point of attack for sports fans. So you've got social engagement now, second screening, something called ESPN Red Zone, which I'll explain. You've got mobile services like Game Pass and Season Pass for the NFL and the NBA. And it means that the fans are more connected to the sport, but it has, I guess, a repercussion that they don't end up coming to the stadium anymore because it's more of an experience to stay at home. You can come to, say, Wellington Sevens or the Nines and try and text somebody at this stadium here or in Wellington, and you can't even text anybody because, the signal's down or whatever. That's how far behind we are in that area. So if I give you a bit of an example, Philadelphia Eagles and New England Patriots, they basically boosted their ground Wi-Fi this year to allow tens of thousands of fans to basically engage with the game on their iPad or whatever device they had at the same time as watching. So Levi's Stadium, home of San Francisco 49ers, they put in 70 miles of cable to supply Wi-Fi service that the organisation claims is 40 times the bandwidth of any other stadium in the States. And that means basically everyone can go with their iPads and enjoy live experience, the atmos, and be on the iPads and check out every other game of NFL that's happening all over the rest of the states. You've got a stadium app there which you can manage your tickets, have your parking pass ready to scan, send parking pass or tickets to family and friends ahead of time. You can order your food and beverages, you can have it delivered to your seat, you can access stadium navigation, and you can basically control in-game replays from all of the other services around the United States. That is how far in advance they are there. And
well,
basically,
that really acknowledges the fact that they're scared. I guess they're having to innovate because they're saying, well, hold on, people are watching, they've got multi-camera, they've got apps on the sofa, multi-screen. They're giving people a reason to physically still turn up.
Well, if you look at New Zealand sport fans, we know that our stadiums are less filled up now with this ITM Cup. Super Rugby fan numbers are down in stadiums. Same with the football team as well. They get about 8,000 to 9,000 on average in a 30,000 stadium. stadium. It's very difficult to fill stadiums with the cricket. And the Breakers are a success when they are playing well, but then you saw the last season where they weren't playing well and nobody came to the ground. So it is basically, you're happy to stay at home because the experience there is far better.
So we're going to have to change the way the live game, that experience.
That's right, the experience. There are a number of things happening in the States as per usual. There's something called multi-camera viewing platforms, which has been put out in the broadcasting environment now, and it basically means that you as a person at home can on your device select which camera you are viewing the game, the replay, whatever you want to watch. So at the moment with our traditional broadcast, the director decides which camera he's showing the replay on. You can sit there in your seat go, oh, why can't they take it from that angle? Well, now you can pick which camera to watch the replay or watch the live, and it gives you total control, so you become the director. There's also the ESPN Red Zone that I was mentioning before, and basically it's a broadcast where instead of watching one game and then going to the highlights of all the other games afterwards, you'll be watching a live game and then the directors will cross straight to another NFL game where it's in the 20-metre near the try line. Well, they don't call it a try line, do they? Score line, and they've crossed to the game where they think something's going to happen. So they're constantly crossing from game to game to game to game to game. So it's like a live highlights package. It's all there ready for you to look at on one channel for about 9 hours. So that's unbelievable. And the other thing that happens, which is happening now in New Zealand, is with social media, Instagram, Twitter, whatever it is that it is now the fan that is the aggregator of comment during the match and after. So right now we still have our shows where, you know, you're waiting for the ex-players to talk about it afterwards, you're waiting for a post-match interview, the press conference, whatever. Now it's the fans that are generating the comment. They are the news, I guess. It's picked up in the newspapers, and there are now companies around the States that are actually taking that content and putting it online on the broadcast, so they're now part of the live broadcast as well. Big changes.
Yeah.
We're starting to get that here at Sky Sport, slowly but surely.
It sounds like there's a real opportunity there to create a whole other layer, an economic layer within sport.
Well, absolutely.
And I wonder whether is there a downside there for the sports, because potentially money's being sucked out with these intermediary apps and providers and all of that technology. Are you guys worried that it might see less money going to the sports people?
I definitely think it's as it becomes more fragmented. The problem for New Zealand is because we're so small, if there is not the aggregator of content, you're just going to have to, if you want to watch 5 sports, you may have to go and buy 5 different sort of access points. Because we're so small, you just can't. Yeah,
that's if we lose the rights.
Yeah. But equally on that, so people have heard stories of this happening all the time, but it was fascinating. I was at Sky commentating the triathlon in London. Mark Watson was over in London, and we were co-commentating the race. And halfway through the bike, I had my phone next to me, but it was on silent. I had a text from a guy back here in New Zealand, and he said, Alistair Brownlee's got a penalty on the bike. And so I was pushing the button to the producer saying, hey, I think there's he's got a penalty. And he goes, how do you know that? It hasn't come through from the race. And he goes, so I texted my mate, I said, how do you know that? He goes, oh, I just saw it on Twitter, and I thought I'd text you because I could hear you commentating. Anyway, I said, well, we haven't heard anything, so I couldn't say anything. Anyway, the guys are coming in off the bike, and they're literally dismounting, and we get the word from the race, and such has got a 15-second penalty. So I knew, I was commentating the race, and I found out basically about 7 or 8 minutes after that happened. And it wasn't the fact that the feed was wrong, it was just that took that long to get from the race to us that was talking the race through. So, amazing.
Yeah, and fans or spectators being able to there actually
the spectator
inform the way a commentary plays out and the way that that sport is presented to an audience. That must be exciting. Do you find that, or is that a bit scary, Melody, the idea of...
No, it is exciting. I started out in the internet, really. A few of us are already engaging with fans anyway, ad hoc, so it is really, really cool to see it coming in. And at the end of the day, you know what, the fans actually pay for the sports. They're the reason players are professional. It comes straight through. And there's probably another aspect to fans and technology and engaging with the game, and that would be fantasy sports. And I've got some numbers here from the States.
Before you go into the numbers, though, you're going to have to explain what fantasy sports is.
Well, so some of you guys will know what that is, don't you? Yeah, so you pick your team. You've got this team, and basically how well each individual does, and it's based on so many different statistics, points, tries, whatever. And it's NFL, NBA, it's rugby.
So you put together your dream team, and then you basically compete.
People against the world, you know, around the whole world. And I've got mates at work that are completely addicted to this.
Have you got a fantasy team?
No, I'm a mother of two. I don't have enough time. I'll get there. But the number playing fantasy football in the US alone is between 30 to 50 million. 89% of them are men. Obviously, they drink more, eat fast food, travel more likely to buy sports magazines, and on average spend $457 a year on fantasy football. And if you put those figures in context, it represents an $800 million in spending, with an estimated impact on the sports industry of a staggering $4.5 billion. That is how huge fantasy sports are online. And what comes out of fantasy sports is network insider shows, web content, statistical analysis just for fantasy players. So a whole lot of other broadcasting aspects, all connection with the fan, and all from technology.
Do you think franchises and clubs are worried about that movement? Because traditionally you had a team and you went out and you bought their kit and you went to the game and you cheered for them, and now you've got a fantasy league that's made up of, you know, a smattering of players from the EPL or the NFL or the NBA.
Depends who controls it.
Yeah.
And, you know, in New Zealand, we're very new in that area. So if, you know, the All Blacks, NZRU step up and control that space, then they're going to earn a lot of money.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to go crystal ball gazing time now. This is always a bit of fun, because in a couple of years we'll come back and get these guys back up on stage and say, what you said didn't happen. I'll make you accountable. John, I'm going to get you to have a quick gaze in your crystal ball. What do you see on the future in terms of sort of the strength coaching, performance side? What are we going to see in this space?
I would say everything's going to keep on getting smaller and smaller. I get fascinated by those movies, like those Jason Bourne movies with those sensors that are inserted in them and all this sort of thing. They have this data up there. I think that, you know, those things are going to become realities. You know, wearable technologies that are going to be of minimal impact on the athlete, and we're just going to get a whole lot more information, I would imagine.
Hamish, do you want to have a gaze in the crystal ball? What do you see on your horizon? Especially on the connection of sports people with business, because this is something that you're working with athletes, aren't you, and trying to connect them into that business network.
I think that, yeah, as the fans get closer to the athletes, the personalities behind the performances are always going to become more important, and people want to get closer to that. So the way in which athletes or agents can monetize that, you know, is only going to increase. But coming back to the use of data and what that's going to look like for performance in the future, I think there are some massive risks which are in front of us, and I don't really care what role technology needs to play. I think New Zealand has won on the world stage some of our core cultural values which we have as people and as a nation, which I think will continue to run through our future performances. I just think that our technology that we can tap into will definitely be an enabler, but it certainly won't be the silver bullet, which no one has said it is a silver bullet, but I think we still are who we are, and, you know, our strength lies in where we've come from, and I still reckon that's a massive part of our competitive advantage.
Thank you. Jamie, where do you see this going?
Well, certainly the expectation is it becomes smaller and more immediate. Every technology needs to be longer lasting, more memory, more power, more metrics. Inertial movement sensors, I think, are the way forward. I think injury management, seeing what the predisposition injury might be when they are getting fatigued, can we limit that risk? Things like that. I think the Moneyball strategy, probably a little bit more as well. Profiling what are the requirements of a certain position or a sport, and identifying those people slightly earlier. But again, as Hamish said, it comes down to the athlete, really. Like, you can point them in the right direction, you can lead a horse to water, but I think that's, from a technology point of view, it's going to become more about profiling.
Thank you. Melody, do you want to have a gaze into your crystal ball? Where do you see it heading for the fans?
For the fans, Broadcasting, watching sports, well, in terms of connectivity, we couldn't even get a brand new national stadium built at the waterfront, so I doubt that we're ever going to have stadiums with good connectivity over the next wee while. I mean, you can't even log on at home, can you, with good speed? So that's a wee while off. But I know for fans in terms of the social media interactivities, Sky's got a lot of projects on the go right now. We've got something called, I think it's Story Launch, which is happening in the netball tests over the next month, where people can tweet and it comes up on screen. It is moderated, so not every tweet will get through, but a good majority. And we've got another application coming early next year where people will be able to get download an app and put feedback or vote for players of the match and that kind of thing. So little by little it's changing, and we're definitely improving in terms of interaction with the fans.
You're listening to Better, Stronger, Faster, Engineering the Perfect Athlete, a session recorded earlier this week in front of a live audience at Eden Park. It's question time for Olympian Hamish Carter, Sky broadcaster Melody Robinson, strength and conditioning coach Jamie Tout, and John Cronin. He's the co-director of the Sports Performance Research Institute of New Zealand. Now for some questions.
We've seen in some technology sports like Formula One and America's Cup where engineering technology really leads those sports, that there's an element of technology cheating as opposed to drugs cheating. You know, if you have the smartest technology, you're going to be winning. And we've seen the same too in, say, swimming with, you know, if you can afford the smart costume, you go that 0.1% faster and win. Is that going to become an issue in terms of government of sport? If you've suddenly got a pair of trousers that tells you when to run faster because it's monitoring your physiology, or you know, this attack is coming from the left side, not the right side, where will the line come on technology?
I definitely see a strong investment in getting ahead of the curve, and a lot of that is identified as valuable IP, and it's certainly not visible. It's something which is, every country's out there trying to figure out what's going to be the thing that's going to make us go faster. And look, I think, the bottom line is I think you touched on it before, the New Zealand psyche is to be quite creative, innovative, and challenge around the fringes of what's possible. I think long may it continue, I say. I think it's fantastic. And we do amazingly well in that space. And we've got a track record of doing it time and time again. So, I think it's a really exciting piece which we do really, really well.
It's quite interesting, eh? Like, we've got a real psyche as well about sharing within New Zealand. And I think we do that really well. And we do share offshore as well. But I think no matter how much information you've got, and I'm going to use another food analogy here, it's not about the ingredients, it's about the guy cooking it. So it's actually interpreting it, learning how to use it, and getting the best cake. Like, you can still burn the ingredients, you can still stuff it up, no matter how much great information you've got, all the technology in the world. If you haven't got that person that understands what they're doing, it just becomes a dud. So I think that's what, again, Kiwis do really well. We've got good people, real good buggers who are willing to work with each other.
This is for the panel in general. My name's Simon. How do you think game rules are going to change with new technology? For example, your VXs, say like the force of a tackle, do you think there'll be a limit brought in with the rulings, say there can't be a tackle of a certain force? Are we going to see that at all?
Good question. If everything goes the way that people think it will, if rugby players keep trending both in strength and body weight, they estimate the All Black will be around 190 centimetres and 119 kilos in about the next 20 years, and that's pretty dangerous. So that's obviously going to increase how hard they hit each other. Right now, it's somewhere between, we actually don't know exactly, but it's somewhere between 5 and 10 Gs. If you equate that to a Formula One car, they're going through about 5 Gs in a turn. Difference being 5 Gs of sudden impact and is very different to a sustained turn. Already, I think we're seeing real changes that influence the game. We know the ball's in play in rugby for longer now, 35 to 40 minutes, where it was a lot lower previously. I think as we engineer a better athlete that they're capable of hitting each other harder, going for longer periods of time, it becomes an entertainment product as well. We want the ball in play for longer, so because it's a better spectacle. But the rules are going that way where we're trying to create a better entertainment package as much as anything else. But we're also trying to challenge the athlete to make it harder for them because they're superseding what they've done in the past. The reason that the 100-metre record keeps coming down is because they're getting there's more competition, natural evolution, better methods of training, all that sort of thing. So it's definitely going to influence. The rules will keep changing because we're trying to modify the product to be a better entertainment.
What about somewhere like in the US where the NFL has this legal case at the moment due to concussion and how that may play out? And if you're able then to measure those Gs and say there is a ruling in America and then that becomes a global standard and the New Zealand Rugby Union say, well, actually our guys are getting 30% larger hits on the field, then that could have a real impact on size of squads and the rules.
Well, JC can probably comment. There's some really good stuff being done at the moment around concussion and impact. I think that part of our game is very early on. It's probably too soon to say. And I think they'll look at it in two ways. I think they'll look at it in a one-off impact and also cumulative instances as well. And that's whether a one-off hit of 5 Gs is as dangerous as, say, 5 at 3 Gs or 4 Gs. But JC can probably comment better.
Not much.
Okay.
But there's a lot of work going on in this concussion space at the moment,
There's a
isn't
lot
there?
of work. You've just got to realise where that hit is. You know, 5G in your thigh, by the time it's absorbed up in here, it might be 1 or 2G in your head.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's the higher the hit, the more it will be transmitted. Yeah, we've got some research happening at the moment. It's quite fascinating. They can actually put little accelerometers in mouth guards now, and we're actually getting the G forces that come through those mouth guards into the head. So we've got a PhD student just finishing off a second PhD in this area. So some of that research we can't even talk about, I don't think.
It is fascinating research, though, isn't it? The fact that they can put a little gum guard in with an accelerometer, and then they can actually, during the game, they can work out how many hits you've had and actually get that cumulative total and say, well, hold on, this guy's well over the threshold of concussion, and then rather than have, a week off, maybe he needs 3 weeks off. So suddenly you need a bigger squad if you're touring around the world because you need more players. But one last question, I've got a little hand here waving.
Hi, I'm Mel. We've talked a lot about the physical. How is technology being used to train the psychological and the mental state of an athlete? I kind of referred to that when you were talking, Hamish was talking about his training. Perhaps the mental had a lot to do with the timing.
Yeah, so I think there's a few things there. On one hand, I think the stigma around mental preparation, resilience, decision-making ability is reducing, so athletes are more open to sitting with someone and talking about how they feel. That was a joke. But I think it's a huge part because, you're under huge amounts of pressure and you're trying to deliver this performance, and so mentally it's always a massive part of how you compete at your very, very best. So I think the stigma around it, obviously, I think this is a field which has got some incredibly smart people and it's only getting more intelligent. And I think the preparation of the physical, the mental, the tactical, all the rest of them, these are the things which are the components of the ultimate performance. And so you can't deny that the ability to be mentally prepared is such a critical part. And I think in the past, athletes have done it generally by default, not necessarily by design. And more often you hear some similar themes coming out around how they dealt with the pressure, like we focus on the process, not the outcome. Those are the cues that I think the mental side, we're getting a lot better at it because of the expertise which athletes are now open to tapping into, or the athlete or the coach. So, and I think it's a great thing that we are, because it certainly was undeveloped when I was competing.
And there's another mental side too, the perceptual decision-making side, the anticipation. If we had some motor skill people here, they much really could comment on that, but there's definitely a large body of work going into that side of things. Working out movement times, reaction times, based on what they perceive and how quickly they process it. And there's lots of technologies out there where they actually throw a ball down, then block it, and you've got to try and predict where it's gone by reading cues and all that sort of stuff off what the wrist did, of that sort of stuff. So there is a lot of work going into that perceptual decision-making area as well.
Yeah, I think, again, it comes back to joining those dots. So people like the Sports Codes of this world, which is one of our big video analysis providers, they can drag in the technical, tactical, and they want to see at what point did they make a mistake and what was the cause. Was it actually because of the mental stress and pressure, or was it actually physical fatigue? And I think the other thing that JC mentions, which I'm fascinated by at the moment, is when I first thought about decision making, I thought the guys who reacted first were actually going to make a better decision because they perceived what was about to happen. It's actually not. It's the guys who react just a slight bit later, like your Roger Federers, who just waits a little bit longer to make a better decision. And it might only be a split instance of a second, but both mentally, because he's got the confidence within himself to pause and take it all in and then process the decision, but also the skills to execute. And I think under pressure and fatigue, where you often, no matter how much training you've got, you'll go back to your go-tos. So no matter how many times you get told to kick off your left foot, even though you're a right footer, if you're under pressure, you'll go back to doing what you've always done unless you've got that ability to control those mental stresses.
Hey, thanks to our star team, Jamie Tout, who is the co-developer of VX Sport. He's also a strength and conditioning coach. Thanks to Melody Robinson. She's a Sky Sports journalist and presenter. Hamish Carter, Olympian and performance planning manager at High Performance Sport. And thanks to John Cronin. He's the co-director of the Sports Performance Research Institute of New Zealand. I'd also like to thank everyone that made it along on Wednesday night to Eden Park. It was a lot of fun. And that's us for another week. We're back next Saturday at the same time. Do drop into the website where there's lots more information on the event that you've just heard. Hey, kia ora. We're back next Saturday. Bye.